So I'd like to invite Richard Lansdowne, Senior Director for Network System Solutions at Semtech, to kind of come up to share again, sort of another complementary piece of this kind of picture, really focusing more on networking, particularly relevant in Glasgow, given a particular deployment that's happening here right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me unmute. Anyone hear me now? No? There we go. Right, so I stand here between you and lunch, which is not a good position to be in. And as the guys at Census will tell you, I could literally talk all day, so someone may have to physically remove me from the floor at some point in the not too distant. I thought, let's make it light. Let's try and not have too many maths and too much maths and too many graphs in this. So I'm going to talk about elephants. Here we're going to go a little bit of history of mobile networks and my involvement with some of them, the requirements and what's different today, some solutions, and my soon-to-be famous Laura Law. So, my first personal telephone experience in mobile sense, here we are, you may have realized, and this is where I grew up. It's kind of the Land's End to your Adriana Groats, I guess. So, let's look a little bit closer on that. BT's System 4. This was the first system that could automatically route calls without the involvement of an operator. So, 2 base stations covered the whole of the county of Cornwall. This some 40 miles apart. You literally subscribed to a base station or more. So, it was just a phone call, but boy was that impressive back in those days. We had to literally manually scan for a channel. You press the scan button here, having dialed the number in, beep, 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 beep. When you got the beep, you hit send. Then you got connected and they all went, well, hey. So let's jump forwards straight over 1G because we haven't got time for that. I like to think of 2G as practical and frugal. The old trusty 2G phone, a little bit like a 1980s Ford Fiesta. We all had one. We had to spray the distributor to get it started in the damp. And there's my first 2G phone. In fact, the first phone I was involved in the design of. And it did everything you expected, and it ran for ages on a fill-up. Actually, the next generation of this, we got to run for 100 hours, the first 100-hour standby phone in the world, just phone calls. And for those of us that knew how to program the SMS center number, we could even text. Quite something. So the architecture of the network was built around boxes, as you can see. Some of them were different colors, but most of them were expensive. In fact, they were all expensive. All the squarey kind of boxes are specific hardware. Big racks of equipment sometimes exist in boxes at the bottom of a tower, sometimes in a room somewhere, but basically they were all expensive, and everything, these base station controllers, mobile switching centers, everything created a system that came through to your public switch telephone network. I guess my first involvement was designing these things, and it was a massive hardware investment. It was complex both for the network and the handset, and it was nowhere near as good as 3G. So what will we have for 3G? The fancy phone, there it is. It's a Jaguar. That is my first 3G phone, not literally, because that's a picture. But you kind of got a bit proud of this thing now. You could do email. You could do all your tasks. It was your personal assistant. It could do with a bit more storage, but, and it wasn't maybe too nifty, but you had to get used to filling the tank every day. Oh, dear. Seemed to have gone backwards. But we could do all this new stuff, maps, contacts, even a little music. So what happened to the network? I stole this picture. So this here is kind of the green is the kind of the picture that we have for 2G. I skipped 2.5G, which is where we introduced something called GPRS. That's basically where we started getting internet connectivity in 2G. And then we brought in a whole bunch of new hardware. Guess what? It was more hardware to buy, and it was quite expensive. So more complexity in both the network and the handset, an additional packet layer. So This thing is not getting any easier to do. Luckily, we're learning. So 4G, we're completely inseparable. Who sleeps with their phone? I sleep with my phone probably more than I sleep with my children, which is not by my choice. So the 4G phone, look at that. It's a big, fancy car, lots of storage, goes pretty fast. You can join in all kinds of games with this thing. It does so much, we literally have to sleep with it. And yes, it does run all day because they have a massive fuel tank. We used to be able to charge a phone in an hour. When was the last time you could charge your phone in an hour? So, there you go. We even sleep with our phones. So what does the network architecture look like for 4G? Oh dear. It's another massive investment. Big old block here. Lots of dedicated hardware. This is all your little small cells because it doesn't work so well, doesn't penetrate the building so well. So this whole thing is building up, getting increasingly complex, so we need an answer. So a few years ago, the industry came up with the idea of NFV and SDN, network function virtualization. So how much of what goes on in these boxes can we push onto someone else's computer? Our computers have now got more powerful, so we can do stuff. We can just throw all this stuff at a scalable computer. As it runs out of power, they just bolt another one on the side. And when you don't need so much power, they take it off and give it to someone else. So this became the pressure in the industry to try to alleviate this constant, massive investment in new hardware. So, in the beginning, there were mobile phones. I'm sure you can read, but now the IoT. Everything now suddenly wants to be connected. We haven't got enough connections. We haven't got enough batteries to power this stuff. Everything has to play a part in some kind of big collaborative system where the big data context becomes far more than the little bit that you're putting into it. So all of these things that you see people talking about, one sensor is never enough. We need a picture. We need some kind of geographic analysis. So I want to bring in the talk. We've talked a little bit about LPWAN, low power wide area network. What's the LPWAN? Well, it's not a car anymore. It's a bike. So the main issue here is that we need to transport these very small packages of data. We need to be able to deploy this stuff incredibly cheaply. We can't afford all those big boxes anymore. Ericsson's not so happy, but we're not going to buy them. It's not critical when this data arrives. What's critical is the big picture it paints, the big story that the whole thing tells. But this stuff needs to go out there and never need refueling. We cannot charge it every day. So here's a list, not a very good list, it's a kind of a diagram, I suppose, of various connectivity options you have for IoT devices, some of which you'll be rather familiar with, some maybe a little newer. So down here, you've got the sort of Zigbees and Wi-Fis. They run out of range after meters. There's some new short-range things coming in from Bluetooth Low Energy, the Thread. You've got some new sort of open standards, one that I know particularly well from the LoRa Alliance. Of course, the 3GPP and GSMA are working on cellular standards, and then you've got a bunch of proprietary standards coming through there. So we need to understand what we need from our connectivity. Is our solution okay to be just us, or does it need to be standard? I think from one of the presentations this morning, there was a lot of focus from their perspective on its standard. Are we really tracking, connecting to stationary objects or moving objects? Do they need to be battery powered, or are they connected somehow to the power? Do we care about whether it's in licensed spectrum or unlicensed spectrum? Short range versus long range. So do we care? Are we just doing something in this building? Is it just our care home? Or are we caring about the environment across the whole of Scotland? Bytes or megabytes? Most of these sensors just transmit a few bytes. You can get a lot from a sensor, from a temperature, pressure, CO2, all of that, in a few bytes. Doesn't work too well streaming Netflix. So we have to understand that there's no winner in IoT. There is no one technology that enables the IoT. This is about matching needs to the technology, to the connectivity, in the same way that you match your needs in every other aspect of life. So let's come to the elephant. The low-power wide area networks is the game changer for the IoT. Why is that? We've got existing connectivity options for powered devices, for high data rate devices. However, what's completely new is this ability to deploy a sensor under a bridge, on a hilltop, in a cow, for years, for the life of the asset, and to connect to it miles away. So here's what the 3GPP proposal, or in fact, they've decided to do this now, the narrowband IoT. They add this whole IoT section to what they call the evolved packet core. I won't go into that, but that is basically saying this new generation of equipment that comes from the NFV and the SDN approach has to be there, so it has to be a new LTE deployment, and they can add, as a software layer, a low-power wide area network. Here's the real difference with some of the other LPWAN approaches. Basically, simple hardware, and the rest's in the cloud. The minimum amount of dedicated hardware possible. The gateway here for LoRaWAN is so simple it fits on a USB stick. That and an antenna, you're up and running. All of the network functions are in the cloud. There is no dedicated hardware. And the difference in the LoRa system is the sensors connect to the cloud, not to the gateway. They never have to scan, they never have to hand off, they just transmit their stuff, and all the gateways are just pulling it in. It doesn't matter how many it gets connected to, it all gets sorted out here. So this ability to connect sensors to the cloud is key to the real difference that we can bring. That means that when this sensor is transmitting, all of the gateways in range are receiving. When you receive the same piece of information multiple ways, you process it, you can say, I have a location for this sensor. And that's completely groundbreaking. So here's our cellular system that's gone narrowband, gone IoT. It's carrying a little weight, and here's your clean sheet approach. But we have to understand that the more choices in data rate, quality of service, etc., are available on cellular, you have to pay for that. It's licensed spectrum. So you have to select what you need for the opportunity you have. So I'll just skip over this. The LoRa Alliance is now up to 400 or so member companies. This is playing into the ecosystem we heard talked about this morning. There's multiple national deployments out there, so you can start connecting sensors to a national network. Here's my law, the 80-20 rule. Oh, no, it's not mine. I'm sure we've seen that one before. No one's ever proven it, but we all accept it because it's basically true. So, LoRa could be any LPWAN, but I'm just going to use LoRa. Sense it, locate it, report it, optimize it, and get a 30% plus improvement. You see 30% improvement in logistic cost, in efficiency, in power consumption, everything by sensing, processing, and optimizing. No one is going to prove it. We will all accept it because, quite literally, it's true. So, the connected fridge, it's whatever the IoT is to the man in the street, right? You wouldn't be the first person to say you didn't want that. But, you know, our white goods can report health back into the manufacturer. They could do all kinds of things that you don't really realize or think about today. So let's just skip on here. Smart city. We're used to smart city about traffic lights, traffic management, things that are power connected. What if we can connect now our bottle banks and avoid this? This is actually near our office in Bristol. I don't know if it's linked. This one over here, we can build sensors and panic alarms into clothing that last the lifetime of the clothing. Never have to be charged. You don't care if it's taken off the peg. Smart office. We move from heat, light, power, all of those things, into measuring if a soap dispenser is full, if a toilet's been used, cleaning it. So we can occupy buildings in a much more efficient way. And this actual examples, more than 30% saving. The Internet of Cows, I love this story, particularly in Scotland, it's great. These guys have developed a sensor, it's like a pill, it's like a massive paracetamol. You put it in the cow, and there's a sensor inside the gut of the cow. It never comes out, it sits there, it's listening to the heartbeat, it tells you all kinds of things about the health of the cow. Guess what? When the cow is stolen, this is this Lego guy here, when the cow's stolen, you can tell it's been stolen because no one can cut the collar off this cow. So, in summary, we're in a new world today. It exists. The census guys are deploying this in Scotland, in Glasgow. And this ability to have very wide area coverage, battery-powered sensors, public or open networks that people can connect to, is really now, the time is now, and it's a real game changer for everyone. This is why I say the rest of IoT. The IoT we have today used to be called M2M. So there you go.
Excellent. So thank you very much. Again, we have usual sort of procedure for questions. There's one right to the front, just down here.
Tim Sommers, Sensors. So a great presentation, very interesting. I'm thinking about the longevity of LoRa from a commercial point of view. We've got 5G on the horizon, which is supposed to be all things to all men, looking at all sorts of different service models, you know, high latency, low latency, big data, small data. Thinking about operators, I mean, they're the guys that tend to rule the waves at the end of the day in terms of commercial deployment. So what's going to happen with LoRa? Do you really think you're going to be able to exist on your own with your own separate network, if that's what I understood you want to do, or do you think it's going to get rolled in some way?
I think one of the key things with the 5G approach is coming from the mobile network operator side. No one and everyone has to buy spectrum to take part in that. So being licensed spectrum adds a cost initially, and there's all kinds of IP costs. For example, if I take one of the mobile network operators that's decided to deploy LoRa alongside their 4 and 5G, they plan to keep it there because they can onboard a device for no cost, no IP cost, whereas it takes the equivalent of what they're charging for 5 years connectivity to onboard a device onto their licensed network, licensed spectrum network. So the other thing that happens with this being unlicensed is that you have players like only yesterday, Comcast in the US announced they're going to be deploying the US. So that is a massively disruptive player to come in up against the Verizons and the AT&Ts to keep driving the cost down and keep. They have no interest in 5G because they have no spectrum, so they are going to disrupt and keep this kind of thing alive. So personally, I believe it has a lot of longevity and will live alongside just because it plays a different game. It has a different cost structure and a different way to enter the market, and it allows anyone to be a network operator, essentially.
Good luck.
Over the back there first, please. Sort of 3 rows back in a second, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Hi, Richard. This is Professor Hadi Larijani from Glasgow Caledon University. Where do you envision the security function will be checked in your architecture? If you go on the slide of the equipment for IoT, where are you going to check for security threats? Where do you envision it will be checked?
So if you look at the sensors that are available today, mostly they're relatively simple sensors. There you go. That's the end of my
his
slot.
phone has
Sorry
just
about that. I'd love to answer your question.
But somebody just hacked his phone.
Yeah. So if you look at the sensors today, they're relatively rudimentary. However, there are now module makers making LoRa modules with secure elements inside. So we start off at the sensor end with a secure element embedded. Then the gateways are basically dumb. They just forward everything, and you deal with everything in the network solution. So that certainly is going to roll forwards, is going to be augmented over time. But I think starting at the sensor end with the secure elements is a very good start.
Will those sensors be able to upgrade firmware, do you think? Because your communication model is pushing everything up. You don't have a bidirectional kind of communication on the bandwidth side.
So the LoRaWAN actually is bidirectional because it supports acknowledgements, and it supports multicast and broadcast. So the big question is in securing the broadcast and the multicast. So that's something that's very much in the technical arena right now, and there's a lot of input going into that. But for sure, that is a key thing to secure that. Spoofing a firmware upgrade would be pretty bad news.
Thank you.
Right, so we have one question down here, and then there's another one just 2 seats to the side of the previous speaker.
Simon Montford from Web3 IoT. So, I totally get it, sort of horses for courses or cows for fields or whatever analogy you want to use. And I love, the kind of, I suppose, ethos behind, LoRa being an open standard, even though it is not using a licensed spectrum. But the thing that I have an issue with narrowband IoT is, again, we're heading towards things being tethered to this ungodly, unholy alliance between device and SIM card and being locked into a particular provider. Can't we just do away with the SIM card, in the sort of LoRa fashion, or Sigfox to a certain extent, although that is a proprietary standard? Why can't we just have devices being manufactured with inbuilt connectivity, no SIM, and it simply just logs on to the cheapest, strongest signal and acquires data, kind of micro packets of data using the blockchain or something like that, rather than, again, being locked into 12, 18-month contracts. It just doesn't make sense when the average household is going to have 200 to 300 connected devices within, I think, 5 to 10, probably about 5 years. Having a SIM, contract for each and every device, it's crazy, right?
I fully agree. One of the key things with having an open alliance ecosystem is it enables many different business models. And certainly there's no reason why that business model could not be supported by people in the LoRa ecosystem.
How about, eSIM?
Sorry?
eSIM, which is this kind of virtual SIM that people are talking about.
That's really in the cellular side. That's not in the LoRa side, right? So there is no SIM.
Got it.
We're going to shift on. The gentleman 3 rows back there.
My name is Craig Easdale from Token Zero Limited. We work in developing hardware for low-power wireless sensor systems. So obviously LoRa is quite interesting for me and looking at using it in an application. What I like about LoRa is the fact it's an open standard. Anyone can deploy their own network if they want to. But coming back to the security aspect of that, does that not mean that anyone can deploy their own network and get data back from other people's sensors?
They can certainly receive the packets in this, and so there's really two. You start off with 2 types of LoRa. There's like a private network type and a public network type. So anyone who plays in the public network space the packets will be received. However, there's you have to do a join, and when the network join request goes in, there's some keys exchanged and sessions set up. So, whilst everyone can at some point break every level of security, you start off by building that into the network. So you certainly can't just sniff someone else's data for sure. Then there's application layer security. So there's network layer and then there's application layer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There's in the front row of the back section.
Thank you very much. Jason Moroney-Cagey from the Urban Farming Company. So it's a fantastic presentation, and it's quite clear that LoRa opens up many markets, business models, and opportunities. But just to kind of maybe draw back a little bit on a more global context, if you kind of consider countries in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe Kenya with some of the innovations with mobile phone technology there. And it was interesting watching this kind of evolution from Ford Fiesta to Jaguar. And so I just wanted to ask you about the disruption that a potential technology like LoRa would have in countries like Kenya, where the innovation in the mobile phone telecommunication sector has been phenomenal. What kind of applications and what kind of disruptions do you see happening in that part of the world where there's been quite an incredible flux?
So I guess if I take maybe two applications from South Africa that are quite widely spaced, one is to do with wildlife reserves and tracking animals, and having sensors inside animals is a massive boost, and to be able to feed it is really a game changer for those guys to not only monitor the health and the location, but to try to catch the poachers. On the other side, you've got communities which exist in areas where there's simply not enough power from the grid. These guys can sign up to a lower tariff from their electricity supplier, which says, we will turn your power supply off. For this, they get a free iPad. The iPad will tell them, oh, we're going to turn your power off between 12 and 2. And they're so, okay. They get like no, I need it. They can do so many denies per week or month or something. But essentially, you have communities signing up to take part in load sharing and then using the LoRa connectivity, because the power's quite often down. So battery operated starts to become a key benefit in that area. So those two applications maybe are examples which show a wide gamut.
Okay, I think it's time to thank that speaker. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.